And we've heard from Professor Queen on foreknowledge, the existence of foreknowledge for this destruction. It might be more interesting to you, as Graham said, that foreknowledge was in light of the struggle that NIST went through for years to establish a fire-based theory, and how unusual the final theory was. During my talk, I'll try to convey 7 points. I'll discuss how the destruction of Building 7 was unprecedented, how the steel evidence was destroyed or left unexplained, and how the final theory given by the National Institute of Standards and Technology came only after years of failed hypotheses. I'll also go into detail on the final theory from NIST and show how it could not have been predicted, how it is self-contradictory and contradicts other known facts about the building and about behavior of a building in a fire. And finally, I will summarize how NIST report was deceptive in many ways and how NIST final theory is unscientific and false. I'll cover NIST report only up to the point of collapse initiation, and my colleague Tony Zambati will take it from there, and he'll discuss the structural aspects and dynamics of building collapse and the NIST report in that respect. So again, it's a non-controversial fact that the destruction of Building 7 was unprecedented. Both of the major investigative bodies of the government made statements to that effect. FEMA, the first investigative body, said the performance of Building 7 is significant because it appears the collapse was due primarily to fire rather than any impact damage from the collapsing towers. This was when they published their report in 2002. And NIST said this was the first known instance of total collapse of a tall building, primarily due to fires. And as we've discussed already today, there have been many fires in tall buildings over a period of more than 100 years. But there's not been one instance outside of 9/11 in which a building has suffered complete global collapse from anything other than demolition. Even on 9/11, not all the buildings that were on fire suffered global collapse. Here we see Building 5 on the upper left, which experienced bigger fires relative to its size and did not collapse as Building 7 did. On the upper right, you see that Building 5 was still standing. On the lower left, you see Building 7 burning on 9/11, and on the lower right, Building 7 having been completely destroyed after that fire. Government scientists spent years trying to offer non-explosive explanations for the destruction of Building 7. The most influential hypotheses and the most long-lasting included one that said that fires fed by diesel fuel tanks within the building were responsible for generating extraordinary heat. The New York Times reported that massive structural beams that functioned as a sort of bridge to hold up the 47-story Building 7 were compromised in a disastrous blaze fed by diesel fuel, leading to the building's collapse, investigators have concluded in a preliminary report. That article from the New York Times was not exactly accurate. They were reporting on the FEMA report for Building 7, which did not reach conclusions, and although the report suggested that diesel fuel might have played a role, it also said that this best hypothesis has only a low probability of occurrence. So basically, FEMA said that loss of structural integrity was caused by fires on the 5th to 7th floors. That's important because that changed as well. The specifics of the fires and how they caused the building to collapse remain unknown at this time, although the total diesel fuel in the premises contained massive potential energy, and the best hypothesis has a low probability of occurrence. They were supported by popular media, Popular Mechanics specifically, which said that investigators believe the fire was fed by tanks of diesel fuel. You may know that this book by Popular Mechanics is often referred to by people who are supporting the official story. And Shyam Sunder, who was mentioned before, said our current working hypothesis is that this pressurized line was supplying fuel to the building and the fire for a long period of time. Although this hypothesis was promoted for years, neither the diesel fuel nor the transfer girder failure made it into the final theory. Diesel fuels were not the cause. As NIST said, diesel fuel fires did not play a role in the collapse of Building 7. Damage from the falling Tower 1 was also not the cause. That was often referred to. Other than initiating the fires in Building 7, the damage from the debris from Tower 1 had little effect on initiating the collapse of Building 7. And again, the design of the building over the Con Ed substation with the transfer girders you see in the diagram below, that was also not the cause. What scientists and forensic investigators usually do is look for evidence. We know that there was no precedent for such an event, but what evidence do we have for a fire-based theory? Unfortunately, most of the physical evidence was destroyed, and NIST said that no steel samples from Building 7 were available for its investigation. That was not true, and we'll see that. Additionally, NIST collected thousands of photos and videos from the public over a period of years and kept them hidden from the public. They have only recently released some of those. We also have documents that establish the fire resistance plan for the building, and that is important evidence related to a fire-based theory. Important evidence also could have been gained through physical testing of steel components. Unfortunately, no such testing was done, despite the fact that the testing would have been relatively easy and straightforward. In the end, this theory was based entirely on computer modeling. As we see here, the U.S. House Committee on Science reported on the destruction of the steel evidence. They said in the month that lapsed between the terrorist attacks and the deployment of the FEMA team, a significant amount of steel debris was removed from the rubble pile, cut into smaller sections, and either melted at the recycling plant or shipped out of the U.S. Some of the critical pieces of steel were gone before the first FEMA team member ever reached the site. This unprecedented destruction of evidence continued throughout the cleanup effort, even when the investigators were there. A good question that remains unanswered is why did official investigators, including the National Institute for Standards and Technology, not follow the national standard for fire investigation? Part of the standard, which is called NFP 921, states that it is essential to prevent the destruction or removal of evidence. That may seem obvious to most of us. Removal of the evidence may have had something to do with the nature of the evidence itself. NIST told us that not one piece of steel from this huge building was left for its investigation, but that was not true, as I said. This sample was photographed by a professor from the University of California in Berkeley. He had been granted access to areas near Ground Zero through a National Science Foundation project. He examined a number of unusual samples as early as 1 week after 9/11. And this sample looks like it has some odd burns or cuts in the steel, and that same professor later stated that he saw melted girders at the World Trade Center. When the official FEMA investigators were finally admitted to the site, they found some very unusual samples of steel. The New York Times reported on perhaps the deepest mystery uncovered in the investigation. This mystery referred to thin pieces of steel discovered by FEMA investigators that were found to exhibit sulfidation and evidence of a eutectic formation that could not be explained by any of the fire-wise professors. They had never seen it before. A eutectic formation is a chemical mixture that melts at a lower temperature than its individual components. In this case, it was a mixture of iron, oxygen, and sulfur. The FEMA investigators reported that the severe corrosion and subsequent erosion of samples 1, which was from Building 7, and 2, are a very unusual event. No clear explanation for the source of the sulfur has been identified. The rate of corrosion is also unknown. A detailed study into the mechanisms of this phenomenon is needed.